Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
I got it.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
Football.
Wildcats.
You know, who says lightning can't strike in the same place twice? It certainly happened in Manhattan, Kansas. Remember back in the 1990s, before Bill Snyder even got to Kansas, back in the late 80s, Kansas State was the worst team in college football, period. Well, enter Bill Snyder, and in the 90s, took him just a few years to make Kansas State relevant in college football. He turned it around. Winning seasons, 9-10 win seasons, and in 2003, they broke through, winning the Big 12 championship. When he retired in the mid-2000s, Ron Prince took over, and Kansas State definitely took some steps back. So didn't take long for K-State to fire Prince, and Bill Snyder came back as K-State head coach for another tenure. And guess what happened last season? You got it, lightning struck once again in Manhattan, Kansas. Same location, because look what happened last season. The Wildcats entering 2011 were picked to finish third to last. They ended up having a 10-win season, and in my opinion, getting absolutely hosed for a BCS bid. They should have got a BCS bid. It didn't happen. They got to the Cotton Bowl, finished the year at 10-3, thanks large in part to a zone read offense that very few defenses had any chance of containing, with Colin Klein at quarterback. We'll talk about him in a second. Kansas State does have several playmakers coming back on both sides of the ball. So why isn't Kansas State getting a lot of love entering this season after what they did last year? I think predominantly it's really due to the fact that they won a lot of close ball games last year. I think any game that they had that was decided by one score, they won all of them except for the game in Stillwater against Oklahoma State. Also, due to the fact that Kansas State last year could not have been their own worst enemy. They had to limit penalties, which they did. They had barely over 60 in the entire season. They also had to control their turnovers, which they did, and they also had to force turnovers on defense, which they did, and they also had to play big on special teams, which they did. So for Kansas State to get another 10-win season, they're first of all going to have to continue to do the zone read offense extremely well, despite the fact that they got to replace a bunch of players up front. And defensively, they have to keep forcing the turnovers, even though they lose several money players on that side of the ball. For Kansas State to remain a contender in the Big 12 Conference, they're going to have to do just about everything that they did a year ago, because last season things just really fell right into place for them. Okay, Colin Klein or bust. It's that simple. That's the way it was in 2011 for Kansas State. Colin Klein was a major part of that offense, and we saw it in the statistics. This guy came out of nowhere, basically, and became one of the bigger names in the Big 12. Not just quarterbacks, but players in general. Over 1,100 yards rushing for Klein and 27 rushing TDs. And throwing-wise, a modest 57% completion percentage, 13 touchdown passes, only 6 picks. The zone read offense definitely was run to near perfection for Colin Klein. Only, in my opinion, 2 teams were able to really get a grasp of that zone read once you get past that season opener in which K-State looked awful against Eastern Kentucky. That was Oklahoma and in the bowl game against Arkansas. Other than that, it was almost impossible to stop Colin Klein. Terrific decision maker, and Kansas State's offensive line last year did a terrific job as far as run blocking. During the offseason, though, we've seen Klein work a little bit more on the passing game. Look, Kansas State's always going to be known as a run-first, run-happy type offense. The passing game's never going to surpass the running game so long as Bill Snyder is there in Manhattan. And for the most part, there's nothing wrong with that, but what you need is a little more of the passing game. So this year, really watch to see Colin Klein's completion percentage. It was 57%, which is modest, but you like to see that percentage get up to at least the mid-60s. If you can do that, that obviously means that your receivers and your tight end in particular, which you have size there, in Travis Tannehill at 6'3", 253 pounds, then that will ease things up with your running game because now teams can't just load 7 or 8 up in the box trying to stop the zone read offense. They're going to have to worry about the passing game as well. So really watch to see how much Colin Klein's mechanics have improved as far as accuracy. That's going to be the big thing for Kansas State and for Colin Klein to continue to be their number one. Remember, Klein is 6 feet 5 inches tall, weighs a little more than 220 pounds. So for a quarterback, when you have size like that, you're able to withstand more punishment perhaps than the average QB. The backfield, can't ignore them either. John Hubert last year. We talk about Klein having a big year on the ground. Well, Hubert almost had 1,000 yards rushing for Kansas State as well. And you have Hubert back as a tailback and the fullback blocking Braden Wilson. Now, as far as the wideouts, really watch for the health of Tyler Lockett. Predominantly a special teams threat, but he did play some wideout a year ago. Unfortunately, had a lacerated kidney during the latter part of 2011, so missed the last 4 regular season games. So his health will be a concern entering this year for Kansas State. Chris Harper had 40 receptions last year for the Wildcats. 40 receptions doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot, but remember, K-State ran the ball predominantly. And another receiver, you'll have Tremaine Thompson. So Kansas State, they've got enough talent in the receiving department, but again, it'll be up to Klein to get them the ball. Well, no doubt when you see both Colin Klein and John Hubert's rushing statistics, you have to give tribute to the men up front. Last season, they were very good as far as rush offense goes. Unfortunately for Kansas State, they got to replace 3 of those starters. We'll talk about the players that are coming back, and that is B.J. Finney, who's a terrific story at center. He was a walk-on that initially they were going to use him at guard, but they moved him to center before the start of last season. And he played throughout the entire season, got all Big 12 honors. So, to me, he's going to be the anchor of that offensive line. The other guy coming back will be the left guard, and that is Nick Puitz, who at one point played junior college ball. So, you have Puitz and you have Finney coming back. Now, let's talk about the guys you have to replace. The left tackle position, it'll be occupied by William Cooper. And the right side of the offensive line, really watch this area for K-State, because you're going to have a couple of redshirt freshmen playing on the right side. That's Boston Stiverson at the right guard position, and also you'll have Cody Whitehair. So, yeah, Whitehair and Stiverson at the right positions. Again, both redshirt freshmen. We'll see if these guys can pick up from where last year's team left off, and if so, Kansas State, once again, should be able to amass a lot of yardage. Last season, yes, the Kansas State defense did bend at times, both rushing as well as passing defense. But there were times in which they had their moments, including forcing turnovers. They were good at that in 2011. 2 guys are going to miss up front, though, entering the 2012 season, and that is Ray Kibble, their first-team Big 12 all-defensive tackle. He's gone, along with outstanding defensive end Jordan Volker. So let's talk about the defensive ends first, the guys that will be expected to get the pressure on the outside for the Wildcats. And that is Adam Davis, a returning starter at one end, and replacing Volker will be Meshach Williams. At the defensive tackle spots, a returner in Bai Lutui, and also at the other tackle, replacing the All-Big 12 player in Kibble, will be John Sua. The 4 guys up front, they know that they have a big task ahead of them because they were vulnerable against the ground game a year ago. So really watch to see if these guys can make progress from September all the way into the latter part of the Big 12 season. The linebacking core got 2 dandies back. First team All-Big 12 player Arthur Brown returns. Transfer from Miami, was a key contributor last season for Kansas State, and I think he's going to play in the NFL one day. And Trey Walker, got to remember last season, Walker and Brown combined for over 150 tackles. So you have production there. So think about how good those guys will really be if the defensive line can live up to their part. Emmanuel Lemire, though, he won't be there, so you have to replace him with Jarrell Childs. Okay, defensive backs for Kansas State. There are some pluses and minuses in this department. Talk about the pluses first, and that is returning Nigel Malone, a terrific corner. And then you have a safety coming back. This is his third year starting, Ty Zimmerman. It seems like any time teams try to complete passes, he's either there, breaking up the play, or he's there making a stop, and sometimes even forcing a turnover. So you have Zimmerman back. But you have to replace two guys who were very active last year in that defensive backfield. That's Tyson Hartman as well as David Garrett. So at the other corner position, you have Alan Chapman. And rounding out the backfield for Kansas State defensively will be the other safety. That's Thomas Ferguson. Again, last season, Kansas State did give up their fair share of yardage, but they were also able to force turnovers as well. Kansas State, they're not going to have the number one defense in the Big 12, not even close. But what they have to do is continue to do well in the takeaway department. Last season, as far as takeover margin, they were positive in this area by a pretty comfortable margin. That defensive line, though, with some inexperience there, has to be able to get to the quarterback and make life easier for the linebackers as well as the secondary. The special teams for Kansas State, this is an area where they look like they're in pretty good shape, returning both the kicker in Anthony Cantel as well as the punter, Ryan Dorr. Talking about Cantel first, last season finished the year strong, making most of his kicks. Did miss some early ones at the beginning, but seemed to get it right at the end. And then the punter, Ryan Dorr, doesn't have a big-time leg. He averaged a little more than 40 yards per punt. But what he did well, he was able to get a lot of hang time on those punts, allowing the punt coverage team to be able to cover kicks. They did a pretty good job of this, with the exception of the Cotton Bowl against Arkansas, in which they let Joe Adams run one back for a touchdown early in that ball game, one of the big difference makers in that ball game. But by and large, Kansas State's special teams were big time last year, especially in that victory at Texas Tech. Kansas State last year was known for blocking extra points as well as blocking field goals, and they were known for getting yardage off of those blocks, including touchdowns. So Kansas State, it's no secret that Bill Snyder definitely uses special teams as another way to try to change the momentum of a game. Now, looking at the schedule for the Wildcats, they're going to have an opportunity to be either 2-1 or 3-0. First game should be a layup against Missouri State, but the second game, you're hosting Miami. Last year at Miami of Florida, K-State needed a goal line stand at the end to upset the Hurricanes, but this time it looks like Kansas State will be at least a single-digit favorite to knock off Miami. See what happens on September the 8th in Manhattan, and then rounding out the non-conference part of the season will be a home game against North Texas. Now, what really stinks about the schedule for Kansas State are a few things. Number one, they play 5 of their 9 conference games on the road. Number 2, they got to open the year at Oklahoma. And last year, the Sooners had a huge second half and were able to spank the Wildcats. This year's game will be in Norman, where the Sooners rarely ever lose. You'd rather play Oklahoma later in the year. If you're going to play them early in the year, you'd rather have a bye week before you play them. But guess what? Kansas State's first bye week occurs after the Oklahoma game and before the Kansas game. You don't need 2 weeks to prepare for Kansas, but that's exactly what the schedule shows. So you're off September 29th. You play Kansas at home against October 6th. Should be a scrimmage. October 13th, they have to watch out for the game at Iowa State, because the next week on October 20th, you play at West Virginia. That game at Iowa State on the 13th could be one that sneaks up on Kansas State if they're looking too far ahead to the Mountaineers the following week. October 27th, you host Texas Tech, should be favored to beat the Red Raiders. November 3rd, at home against Oklahoma State, and this is definitely a game that you wish you could have earlier in the year against the true freshman quarterback in Wes Lunt for the Cowboys. Lunt, by the time we get to early November, will have a lot more familiarity with the offense and with the speed of the game. It's not to say that it's an automatic loss for Kansas State, because it's not. Again, you'd rather play Oklahoma State earlier in the season, but you play them later, and we'll see how that one works out. Last year's game was a thriller won by Oklahoma State. November 10th at TCU. That'll be a tough one. November 17th at Baylor. Got a good shot at a win there, because Baylor's not the same team as a year ago. And then the bye week before you close out the season at home against a team that you have had their number. That's the Texas Longhorns. 4 victories in a row now for K-State over Texas. So if you look at the schedule, there are opportunities, but there are also going to be some challenges along the way. My final thought on Kansas State, I expect Colin Klein, despite the inexperience on the right side of the offensive line, to continue to put up nice numbers. It has to be shown to me first, though, that Kansas State could hurt teams by throwing the football, which during certain games this season, they're going to have to be able to do in order to win. Also, you have to remember, too, defensively, they've got a lot of players to replace, and it's not like defensively K-State just shut teams down last season. And also have to remember, too, the Wildcats won a lot of close ball games. So I'd be very surprised if they had a lot of close games this year that they could continue to win almost all of them. Usually, at some point, that stuff stops. I still think K-State's going to have a good year, okay? They're ranked in the top 25. That's the good news. And they have Klein back, and they have Hubert back, the running back, and Arthur Brown's one of the best linebackers in the country. But the bad news for Kansas State, even though they're ranked in the top 25, 5 other teams in the league are too and are ranked ahead of them. So I've got Kansas State going 7-5 and finishing 6th in the league. And again, that's not to say that Kansas State's a bad team. It's just to say that 5 teams right now that are ahead of them are either slightly better or noticeably better. It'll still be a good year for K-State, but it's not going to be the season that they had a year ago. That's my look at the Wildcats. We'll take a look at another 10-win team from a year ago. That's the Baylor Bears. That'll be my next preview. We'll catch you next time.